Support for the Marketing Smarts podcast comes from GoToWebinar, providing today's marketers with the next generation in webinars. Learn more at gotowebinar.com/marketingprofs.
Tips from business authors and experts known around the world.
Also, Ann Hamley.
Ways to improve your community's marketing, starting now.
Starting now.
Starting now.
Right here on the Marketing Smarts podcast.
Welcome back to Marketing Smarts, an interview series brought to you by MarketingProfs. I'm your host, Carrie O'Shea-Gorgon. Thanks for listening. Today on this special video episode of Marketing Smarts, we'll welcome back Daniel Waas. Daniel is the Director of Marketing for GoToWebinar at LogMeIn. He joined me on a previous episode to talk about secrets for runaway webinar success. I invited Daniel back to Marketing Smarts to talk about new research on trends in B2B content engagement and consumption. We'll talk about what formats work best, what makes for great content, the 7 deadly sins of content, how executives are different than other people in the B2B space when it comes to content consumption, how important video is, and much, much more. I'm very excited to have Daniel back with us today.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. No, I can't think of a thing to say. Daniel, thanks. Oh, maybe I'll just come up with something on the spot. We'll talk about something completely unrelated, like the origins of Superman, whether we think it's realistic.
I don't know the origin story of Superman. That's how far away we are in Germany from superheroes.
You're in for a treat, my friend. So buckle in. It's going to be a while. Just kidding. So Daniel, thanks so much for talking with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again.
I am pleased to have you back. You always share really good, valuable information and insights. And this is no different. You've come equipped today with a brand new study. Is that right?
That is completely right. And I have all the papers in front of me, lest I forget any detail, because, no pressure after setting the bar and saying people liked it for all the stats. I'm like, damn, I got to have these stats together.
Well, I mean, not like beginning to end stats. Stats in context, that'd be a boring half hour, Daniel. But that said, these stats are very interesting. So tell me about the content consumption study.
So one thing that we wanted to find out is, all right, so obviously on GoToWebinar, people host webinars all the time, but what is the type of content that really is interesting to a B2B audience, right? Like what makes them interested in the first place, and then also what keeps their interest? Because I think one thing that if you're in long-form content, you want them to stick around, you want them to engage. So what is it that drives people to engagement? And so to that end, we've analyzed a ton of data on GoToWebinar, but then we also wanted to just get one-to-one with people. And so we did a big survey series with over 3,000 B2B professionals to figure out, well, what is it that drives your interest in content?
And they were like, I need to know stuff for my job? Like, what did they say? What surprised you?
That was the most unsurprising thing about it. So if you think of most valuable topics, what they say is, hey, I'm really interested in best practices and educational stuff. So all these how-to blog posts, they work for a reason. They're interested in stats and research findings. Surprise, surprise. Always good to have a survey with 3,000 people in it. And they're interested in industry news. So those were considered the most valuable topics. And then if you think about what their motivations are for why they do is, yes, it's exactly the one you said. Hey, I want to learn new knowledge and I need new skills for my specific role, for my job. So help me get better at what I need to do every day. And that was really what they were interested in.
That's not surprising at all then. I mean, that's exactly what I would have anticipated, which still, it's nice to have the validation. But like I said, the stats played last time, right, on the podcast. So it stands to reason that across any kind of content format, that stats, research, industry knowledge are going to be something popular among B2B marketers.
Absolutely. And that's something that we also saw when we did the title analysis of like 350,000 webinar titles. Like all that stuff does well. How-to does really well. Entry-level information does really well. 101s. But then also anything that has like next year's year in it, 2019, whatever it is, right? Oh, I got to know what's going on in 2019. I better stay up to date. So all of these things work. What was interesting, though, we also looked at content consumption on the consumer side. And what I thought was funny is that for consumers, it's like cat videos. right? Like, so no, I don't want to learn stuff, right? Learning was actually like on all the lists of things that they could use. Learning actually came last, and the first
Oh
was
no,
entertain me,
it was last. I mean, I would think it would be lower than like entertainment, but last.
Yeah, it was last.
Okay.
So that was like, oh, okay. So if you're in B2C, you better get these cat videos out and you better be entertaining. What I thought was funny about that also is like entertaining when it came to, what gets a B2B marketer interested, entertaining didn't come up at all. So we're apparently all really boring and dull people.
No, I mean, they say that, but I promise you an entertaining piece would perform better, even if it's about like logistics at a nuclear power plant.
Yeah. So the cool thing about that was when we looked at, so that was when we asked for, what catches your interest. But when we talked about, hey, what makes you hang on to the very end, read on to the very end, that's where entertaining came up, right? So yes, your content still needs to be entertaining, but that's not why they're coming, right? So,
Right.
But if you want to keep their interest, and if you want to leave the lasting impression that they should be in touch with you in the future, then that's where the entertainment comes in.
Tell me more about format. So we're talking right now about the kind of information that gets people interested, but what about the format? Do B2B marketers have a preference?
They have. So what was interesting was that they consume all types of formats. So it's not like one format wins it. What was interesting also, we did a slice on just executives, so decision makers, and are they? And again, what stood out was they're consuming more of everything, right? So it's not like
they're pigs. Those executives are like information pigs.
That's right. And so they're getting in there more. But the number one preferred format was video. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So when we asked them, what are the most engaging content types? Video was the number one that came up for most engaging. And the second one was, surprise, yay, webinars. So we didn't make the first spot, but at least we made the second spot. So I was kind of happy about that. And what stands out to me of these two winning against the others is just those are the ones that are personable. And when you and I talked last, one of the things, like we have this big topic globally of trust and trust issues and how far can you trust anybody. And I feel like video and webinars are both areas in which you actually interact with real people in a sort of live environment. And I think that's what makes the difference, right? You can really build trust and rapport with people. And I think that's kind of unique. And so I was happy to see those two stand out.
So you think that's important for the success of a content type then, is at least webinars and videos have in common this kind of personal interaction, or at least access. It's not always interactive, right? Like a video or webinar watched on demand, it's not interactive anymore exactly, but you're seeing the person.
What you get is that like sense of like the personality, and so podcasts fall into that as well, right? And so as you mix it up, obviously you don't want to just over rely on one specific type. I think you should go with a broad mix, but I feel like that's where webinars, videos, and podcasts play in, is building that relationship and being approachable and real to people. And so I thought that was kind of interesting that was what came up high as engaging. What came in last, by the way, were press releases.
Oh, that's sad. I'm sure that there's good press releases and not as good press releases, but what I noticed was that video was far and away the favorite, and then podcasts were, like ahead of the middle of the pack, but they weren't, like run far and away the most popular thing. That was video. And webinars were second. So, I mean, there's definitely something there. Of course, I don't think that people make a distinction between video podcasts, whatever. The term, I mean, is a little amorphous. So it's possible there's some overlap there. What absolutely doesn't work? I know you've talked about some of the deadly sins of content. Like what definitely does not work?
There's like I liked it because it was actually 7, so giving it a deadly sins headline made total sense. So the 7 deadly sins then, too promotional, right? So really only talking about your stuff and why your stuff is great. So basically starting with we instead of you. Too promotional was the number 1. Too wordy was the number 2. For God's sake, who has time to read these, 150 emails that we're all getting every day, right? So keep it short and snappy. And I'm certainly not alone in finding myself like I look at a long email and I'm like, really? and you just skip it. And especially if it's promotional. So too wordy, too high level. I thought that one was interesting, specifically when you think of more long form content. So like this fluffy content, right? Like, hey, the 9 tips to whatever, and you're reading the 9 tips, and you're like, well, that's super obvious. That doesn't give me any information. That doesn't have anything in it that I didn't know before. So too high level. Number 4 was not actionable, right? Okay, this is interesting and maybe even entertaining, but what's the next step I'm supposed to take? So tell me, what is the action that I should take that is going to get me to success? Poor formatting and design was the 5th sin. Poor formatting, design. So hey, you've just executed poorly on this. Poor writing and delivery. I thought it was interesting that came up later. It's like, so if you have something really interesting to say and it's actionable for me, you can deliver it poorly, and I'm still going to be sort of okay with that.
Like you can get away with it. There's a little more leeway.
Yeah. And then the number 7 was it doesn't deliver on the promise. So hey, you said this is going to be the definite guide to whatever, and it didn't really live up to that.
How about an example of something that doesn't live up to the promise? Like some of the things you looked at that fell victim kind of to that mistake.
I'll bring one of my own examples, right? So sometimes, like, we always ask on our own content webinars, hey, how would you rate this? And when I get poor ratings, in a lot of cases, it's because I had kind of skimped on thinking through the title versus the content, right? Like I have this idea for a webinar that we're going to run, and I write a blurb and a title, and then at the time when it comes to putting together the deck, I look at the title, and then I start hacking away at the deck, and then I run the webinar, and in the end, I'm like, oh, well, that didn't really totally match what I promised in the headline, right? So, and I think that's just something that to remind ourselves of when we're content producers, that even if you time this apart, think about what is the promise, and consider changing the title if what you have doesn't live up to what you thought it would be.
It is true, though, that in the industry, people want your description first. So they ask for your title, they ask for your description, and then you have, however many weeks you have to do the presentation itself. So it's really important then that you as a content creator stay focused on what was promised.
Yes. So I got red ears when I read through the comment. I'm like, oh, yeah. Well.
You were like, that's fair. Okay. Well, it's nice of you to own up to that instead of, showcasing someone else's mistake. It's really very nice of you. So that's kind of what's wrong. That's what not to do. But what should you do?
All right. So there's, all right, staying with the sins. These are the virtues of content that gets hard. Number 1, needs to be easy to understand, right? Don't talk over people. And this is obvious as well, right? Like, so all the acronyms and all the jargon and all of that, just leave it at the door. Be down to earth and just use the language you would use when you talk about it, right? So write like you talk, make it easy to understand. Keep it educational. So what we had before, right? Hey, if there's nothing in it that I can learn and take away from this content, then it doesn't really help me. And then again, the entertaining part. So one example that I've seen cited often is a content piece that the Center for Disease Control put out that was about zombies, right? And it has this whole zombie theme, right? So and I know that's with your sci-fi background.
Yes, I love that one, actually. Because what you need to get prepared for a zombie apocalypse is the same thing you need to get prepared for any other kind of disaster. So it makes perfect sense. It was like right up my alley. It was a graphic novel. It was awesome. I love that one.
That's just a really great example of, like, you've conveyed the value of, this is what you need to do. Here are the steps that you need to take. Better get that axe out. And then it needs to be entertaining. And what could be more entertaining?
Double tap.
Being in the fetal position on your sofa because you're so scared of the zombie movie.
Don't worry, it won't last long. Share your passion, creativity, and brilliance with the all-new GoToWebinar. GoToWebinar is making it easier than ever to build stronger connections and reach more people faster. Start sharing your story today. Learn more at gotowebinar.com/marketingprofs. So there's definitely things to do and things not to do. And what I love about all this is that it's all based on research. So you're not just saying it as a matter of best practice, opinion, or anecdotal evidence. You've analyzed all of this, so you know what people want.
Which brings to memory that in the show notes, I think we're sharing out the PDF that has all these stats in it, because especially when we talk about like, hey, well, so the podcasts are in the middle. What does the chart actually look like? So those should be somewhere in the show notes, and you can have a look at the actual report, so that you don't need to trust our bad memory and thoughts on it.
No, well, if my podcast had been on the list specifically, I'm sure it wouldn't have been in the middle. It would have been much higher up, Daniel. I'm just saying. You mentioned kind of in passing that executives, you put them in sort of a different bucket, or at least maybe analyze them separately. What were some noticeable differences between content consumption preferences among B2B marketers generally and executives specifically?
Yeah. So the one that I already mentioned is they just consume more content overall, which I thought interesting because, in a sense, you're always trying to get through to the executive and make them do something, right? Like, I want to get into that decision process, and I'm having trouble with the decision maker. So having that validation that they actually consume more content rather than less, I thought was interesting, right? Because you always think of the executive as super time strapped and you're not going to be able to get through and so on, but they're actually consuming more of everything. And so a content play specifically going after executives is a good idea because they actually consume all of that. The other thing that I thought was interesting and that stood out to me was they actually trust vendor content more than the individual contributors. So when we asked them, like, how much do you trust content? How much do you trust vendor content? Vendor content was actually a considered part of the purchase decision. So I thought that was interesting as well, that they place more trust than the average person on vendor content. Doesn't mean that they rely wholly on it. So they also, for them, one thing that didn't come up as much for the overall population was analyst reports, right? That popped more for the executives, right? So trying to make a more informed decision on what you're going to buy. So these were just some of the examples. There was also one about attitude, but I can't remember that, and I don't have it.
It's just interesting to me to think that among the B2C marketers, you're hearing more than ever influencers or you need to trust them versus trust the vendors. That's what's happening. People are trusting other individuals, whether it's influencers or other contacts. But in this context, it seems like vendors actually have an opportunity to create the kind of content that can move people down the funnel because people will trust it. They're looking for it.
I think, in the end, there's like, of course, you're going to have, you're expecting bias from the vendor, and that's fine. But the vendor is also the one that knows the most about whatever they're pitching. So it's still highly relevant information. And that's my personal take on why that reflects, is just like nobody knows as much about the stuff than the vendor. So in the end, you want to have that demo discussion because they're going to show you the ins and outs. They're not going to show you the ugly backside of it all. That is something that you then would go to the review side for. But they do have in-depth knowledge that it's kind of going to be hard to get anywhere else.
You discover the ugly backside later after you purchase. That is, you post-purchase.
The next vendor is going to promise you green meadows, and it's all going to be...
Of course.
Of course.
So what did you learn about the winning characteristics of content? Any surprising revelations there about what is and is not important? I was surprised people didn't seem to care about whether it was mobile optimized, which was interesting to me.
Yeah, and so I wonder how much that is, like the prevalence of, like, so if I ask that in a survey versus asking it the moment you can't read the stupid post on the mobile, a different situation, right? So we had this whole section on attitudes, and I was a little underwhelmed by, people like visual content more, right? So there wasn't anything in there that I thought was especially salient, if you will.
So I do think that's an important point. So a lot of this, it's based on surveys, right? So people will say one thing, but in the moment, maybe do something else. So it's always important to look at your own data for what people are accessing and what's keeping them on site, what's getting them to do what you want them to do. I worry a little bit that sometimes people are like, that piece of content isn't working. They don't stay on it long enough or something. But really, people leave that piece of content to go do what it was you wanted them to do, whatever that thing is, like schedule a demo or talk to a salesperson or join your email list. And in that case, it's like a fantastic piece of content. So As valuable as statistics and trend information is, I really think you need to also look at your own analytics as well to figure out like what's working specifically for your audience. Let's not go off the deep end. I mean,
no, absolutely. And I think, when we talked about the webinar benchmarks last time, right? Like that is all stats that are where we directly got the stats from behavioral data. And that's a completely different beast, right? Like
can't lie.
It's like, no, this is what you did, and that might not always add up. And so I think it's good to triangulate from different sources, and surveys, I think, obviously have a ton of merit. And it was just interesting to see that, that educate me and tell me what to do. That's really the main takeaway I had from it, right? Like they wanted deep, actionable information and basically guidance on like, hey, tell me what the right approach is so that I am not forced to research 15 different sources to make up my own mind, right? Like it's okay to give me a path of what the recommendation is.
Like a cattle chute. Just keep them going down. There is an inevitable outcome where they purchase, so I totally get it. One of the things you mentioned in the report itself was that on-demand is not optional. Tell me what you meant by that and how important that is to have your content available on demand.
Yeah, so and this is specifically if you think of live streaming, live video, live webinars, right? So there's a large part of the population, and there's like if you looked at what do they prefer in terms of content formats, right? There's a large part of the population that says, hey, I want to consume stuff on my own time, and I don't necessarily want to participate in anything live, which if you're a webinar vendor like we are, that kind of sucks, right? Hey, wait a minute, I'm telling people it's a good thing to engage live. And so the point of that is 26% of people that sign up for webinars, for example, say I only want to watch this on demand. So I want to watch this on my own time. I'm not ever going to attend. And yes, I gave you my registration data, but I'm just not going to be there because I have no intent to be there. And so you're missing out on a significant chunk of your audience if you don't make your stuff available on demand. And so that's especially relevant to live, to the webinars. Obviously, if I'm talking blogs and ebooks and all of that stuff, that's available on demand because that's just its nature. But that's basically what I mean when we talk about why you should have your stuff on demand, because you're missing out on a chunk of audience that just doesn't want to consume live and is not interested in that modus.
So yes, do video, but if the video you're doing is live, make sure you're caching it for later view as well.
Yeah, I mean, this also makes sense from a production perspective of like, well, I spend 4 weeks doing this, so I might as well get more return from it, and people want it, and so I think that's the point, right? You're missing out if you're just thinking of it as this like one-time event, and you can really get more from that content and repurpose it and get more demand from it if you plan for on demand.
I'm definitely the person that does that, signs up only to watch it later. I only go live if I'm moderating it or presenting.
That's it. Funnily enough, it's kind of similar for me. I only attend live if I feel like I really have a ton of questions that I want answered. And so I feel like for me, that's one of the big benefits. I can actually go in there and fire off my questions and get answers. And I do like on demand. And then I prefer live for a one-on-one conversation.
That's interesting. So like an interview like this.
Yeah, or also just like I mean, going back to the vendor content stuff, right? So I am frequently in a situation of buying marketing technology, and I go pretty directly for a trial, and then I also go pretty directly for a demo. So like, walk me through this, right? Like, what have I missed as I went through this? So I like the on-demand, hey, I can do this on my own time and I don't need to be bothered by anyone. But the next thing I seek out is actually having someone on the other side answer my specific questions. And so in that sense, that is something that, there's a couple of ways that people solve for that if it's website chat. But usually if I go to website chat, I might not have the most knowledgeable person on the other side, right? So
that's true.
Is on the webinars, I usually have someone who knows stuff, right? And so I get a better answer. Same if I go in a demo situation with the vendor, I have someone on the other side who demos this all day long, so I'm going to get a better answer. And so
someone who knows stuff.
Yeah,
I love that.
demand as long as I like, and I like that binge mode, right? Like you go into binge mode, I have this one decision to make. Let me go into binge mode, figure stuff out, and then once I feel I know enough, now I want someone who actually is going to answer my questions.
To your satisfaction. I mean, you'll get an answer if you do the website chat, but it might not be a satisfying answer. Something. Let's talk a little bit more about video. What are some things that people can do to incorporate video into their mix and do it right?
Yeah. So we've played around with a ton of video recently, both to promote the events that we have, no matter if it's live or if it's an in-person event, but then also to just engage people, explain the product. And so we've done a ton of explainer videos that have been pretty successful in just walking people through it. And then we've done a ton of promo videos. And we basically now, and this is something that we learned from a partner who basically does video all the time, we co-promoted an event, and they use these small 30-second video teasers to promote the event, and especially on social. And they had a positive ROI on their social promotion for the webinar, which, you know, whenever I did a social promotion for my webinar, I was never ROI positive. And so I was like, what are you guys doing? Tell me more about this. And what they did was they did these video teasers, and they worked really well. And they placed them on the landing page, they placed them in the email invite, they placed them on social. And so by now, for pretty much every webinar that we run, we produce a video teaser. And there's like 2 tools we use. Am I allowed to call out tools on Pro?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, great. So giving some love here to some others. So one is Wave Video. So really like the guys from Wave. Super easy to put stuff together. You have a library of video. You put content over it. It's super easy to make a webinar teaser in Wave. So we do that a lot for ours. The other guys that we use is Beyond. So they do these animation videos. You can use them for explainers, but I have a template set up that I use just for webinar promotion that is already kind of ready-made, and I just need to drop different topics into it. And I can put some examples together. Maybe we could put that in the show notes too, just to have a quick look at that. And so we tested putting them in the email. So we saw a 16% lift in click-through rate when we had the video still in the email over our standard template. So it's essentially like it's just a screenshot of the video with a little play button over it. And so when you click it, it gets you to the landing page, and then the landing page actually has the video on it. And so by putting the video on the landing pages, so that was also good. We got a 24% increase in conversion rate on the landing page. So of people coming to the sign up page and then actually signing up for the event. So 24% lift over there. And then on social, it just gets you more attention to bring it in. And so I don't have the results handy from that, but looking at Beyond's example, so we did co-marketing, they promoted it, and I don't have the data here, but like they were ROI positive. So they used a retargeting audience, so they had their retargeting set up, and then they were hitting the retargeted audience with the video promo. And it was like, I think it was like $2 per person that ended up registering for the webinar, which I thought was insanely better than what I saw.
Well, I mean, depending on what they're doing after the webinar and what the conversion rate is and how much that's worth to you, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, they sold, like from that one webinar, they sold enough subscription to Beyond to make the budget ROI positive right away, which I thought was pretty impressive.
What do you look like as a cartoon? You said they do cartoons for.
Hang on, wait. Do I have it somewhere? It's probably going to be too small. I'm going to hold it in the. And so, by the way, yes, we are also doing this on camera.
Cool.
Put that in there.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
I even have my signature blue jacket on. I'm going to send you a version of it.
Yeah, I want to be a cartoon.
Yeah.
If I'd known being a cartoon was an option, I mean, that would have made life easier today.
Yeah, looking further, they have like this character creator, which is kind of cute. So you can make it. I'm sure you could even get them like a Patriots shirt or something.
Yeah, I'm gonna need that. I'm gonna need to customize it and bling it out. No. Daniel, where can people learn more? Where can they get their hands on all of this fantastic data?
Yes. Well, so we have the GoToWebinar blog, so you can just Google GoToWebinar blog or find it in the show notes. So that is where we basically publish all the information that we have. Then you can find me on Twitter and on LinkedIn, so Daniel Waas on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I can, as Carrie can attest to, talk about B2B and content and webinars for hours on end.
And Star Wars, Star Trek, numerous other geeky topics, but not Superman's
origin story.
So this is so I'm from Germany originally. So my superhero knowledge sucks.
Well, what's the German equivalent of Superman? You guys have
Superman, right? So in Germany we have our superheroes or your superheroes. But I don't know. I wasn't.
You just didn't care.
As ingrained in culture as it is over here.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So what did you talk about instead? What kind of content were you consuming as a youngster growing up in Germany?
So no, it's all good. But sci-fi was big. We had some couple of German shows, and then there's always basically the adopted American pop culture, and that's David Hasselhoff. So as you probably know, every German loves the Hoff, and I could now start singing one of his 90 songs, but I won't.
See, I love David Hasselhoff also, but I'm more Knight Rider, so I don't know if that defines me in some personality study somewhere. But thanks so much for talking with me, Daniel. This has been incredibly informative.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Carrie, for having me on again, and thanks everybody for listening in, and come say hi.
Thanks for listening here to the very end. And thanks again to GoToWebinar for sponsoring this episode of Marketing Smarts. If you haven't already downloaded the complete study on trends in B2B content engagement and consumption, definitely do that. It's free and very, very worthwhile and interesting reading. This has been the Marketing Smarts podcast, brought to you by MarketingProfs. I'm your host, Carrie O'Shea Gorgone. Talk with you next time.